People feared many things on the Montana frontier: blizzards, mountain lions, outlaws hiding along forgotten trails. But old ranchers often warned that the forest claimed more lives than any gun ever had. Not because it was cruel, because it was patient. A man could lose the trail by only a few steps. A swollen creek could erase every footprint before sunset. One fallen tree, one wrong turn, and the wilderness would quietly keep its secrets. Caleb Walker had lived beside those woods for nearly 15 years. He never believed the forest was his enemy. He simply respected it. Every trail, every stream, every silence. After losing his wife to a winter illness 5 years earlier, the pine-covered hills behind his ranch had become his refuge. Whenever grief grew too heavy, he saddled his old chestnut horse and disappeared beneath the towering evergreens for hours. The trees never offered answers, but they always gave him enough quiet to keep moving forward. Autumn arrived early in the Montana Territory in 1885. Cold rain had fallen for 3 straight days. The creek behind Walker Ranch overflowed its banks. Mud covered the wagon paths. Several horses had wandered into the forest after lightning frightened the herd during the storm. Caleb left before sunrise to bring them home. Ranger, his aging gelding, moved carefully through the damp undergrowth. Broken branches littered the trail. Fresh moss clung to fallen logs. Everything smelled of wet earth and pine needles. About 2 miles from the ranch, Caleb discovered fresh hoof prints. His missing horses had passed that way only hours earlier. He followed them deeper into the forest. Then something caught his attention. Smaller tracks, barely visible in the mud. Not a horse, not a deer. Human. One set. Light. Uneven. Whoever made them had been limping. Caleb climbed down from Ranger and knelt beside the trail. The footprints wandered away from the main path, toward thicker timber, toward country few people entered willingly. He frowned. No hunter would go this way. The farther he walked, the stranger the trail became. Several saplings had been snapped at shoulder height. Bushes were crushed as though someone had forced their way through without caring about the noise. Then, the footprints disappeared. Rainwater had washed everything clean. Caleb stood quietly, listening. The forest answered with nothing but distant ravens. He was about to turn back when tap. A faint sound echoed somewhere ahead, almost too soft to notice. Then again, tap, tap. Not an axe, not a woodpecker. Too slow, too deliberate. Caleb removed the rifle from his shoulder, more from habit than fear. Hello. No answer. Only another weak knock against wood. He followed the sound through tangled brush until the ground suddenly gave way beneath his boots. A marsh, hidden beneath layers of fallen leaves. He stepped back immediately. One careless stride would have sunk him waist deep into thick mud. Then he saw her. She was nearly invisible beneath a maze of fallen pine trunks. One massive tree had collapsed during the storm. Its heavy trunk pinned her lower leg against another log. She couldn't move. Dark hair clung to her rain-soaked face. Her buckskin dress had been torn by branches. Her hands were covered with dried mud from trying to free herself. An empty leather waterskin rested beside her. She had already finished the last drop. Judging by the condition of the wood, she had been trapped there for at least 2 days. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes remained closed. Caleb carefully climbed across the fallen trunks until he reached her. He touched her wrist. A pulse. Weak, but steady. As if sensing someone nearby, the young woman slowly opened her eyes. For several long seconds, she simply stared at him. Confusion, exhaustion, disbelief. She tried to pull her leg free. Pain stopped her immediately. Don't. Caleb knelt beside her. You'll only make it worse. Her voice came out rough from thirst. You should leave. He looked at the tree crushing her leg. I don't think so. A familiar voice echoed through the trees. Caleb. It was Tom Granger, a lumberman working several miles east. He soon appeared carrying an axe over one shoulder. When Tom saw the trapped woman, his expression hardened. Forget it. Caleb looked up. She'll die if we walk away. Tom glanced toward the darkening sky. The marsh will swallow this whole area if it rains again. We don't have time. Caleb remained where he was. Then we'll make time. Tom lowered his voice. She's Apache. You don't know who's looking for her. Caleb answered calmly. Right now, I know exactly who's looking at me. He glanced back at the woman struggling to stay awake. And she needs help. Tom sighed deeply. You've always had a habit of making difficult choices. Caleb smiled faintly. My father called them the right ones. The fallen pine was far too heavy for one man. Even with both of them pushing together, it barely shifted. Tom finally drove the edge of his axe into the trunk, cutting away smaller branches to reduce the weight. Caleb searched nearby until he found a long cedar pole. Using it as a lever, they slowly lifted the tree just high enough. Now, Tom shouted. Caleb reached beneath the trunk. Can you move your leg? The young woman clenched her jaw. I'll try. With the last of her strength, she pulled free. The log crashed back into place a heartbeat later. Another second, and it would have been too late. The moment the pressure disappeared, she tried to stand. Her injured leg immediately collapsed beneath her. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. You've been trapped too long. I can walk. No, I don't need. Before she could finish, dizziness overwhelmed her. She nearly lost consciousness. Without another word, Caleb slipped one arm beneath her knees and another behind her back. She was lighter than he expected, far lighter than someone who had eaten regularly. Tom picked up the abandoned water skin. You really planning to carry her all the way back? Caleb adjusted his grip. If that's what it takes. The lumberman looked toward the fading daylight. That's over 3 miles. Caleb started walking. Then we'd better not waste another minute. The journey back felt endless. Twice Caleb had to stop so she could catch her breath. Once she apologized for slowing him down. He answered with the same quiet certainty each time. We're getting there. As the first lights of Walker Ranch finally appeared beyond the trees, the young woman opened her eyes again. She looked at the warm glow spilling from the cabin windows, then at the man who had refused to leave her behind. A tear quietly rolled down her cheek. No one, she struggled to finish the sentence, has ever come back for me before. Caleb looked ahead toward the waiting cabin. His voice was gentle. Then it's about time someone did. Neither of them realized that the footprints leading into the forest had not belonged only to her. Someone else had been following the same trail. And before long, they would come looking for the woman Caleb had just brought home. The fire had nearly burned down to glowing embers when Caleb finally reached the cabin. Rain began falling again just as he pushed the front door open with his shoulder. Tom Granger hurried ahead, clearing space beside the stone fireplace. Lay her here. Caleb carefully lowered the young Apache woman onto a thick wool blanket. Her clothes were soaked through. Her injured leg had already begun to swell. Mud covered nearly every inch of her boots. She had survived the forest, but only barely. Caleb poured fresh water into an iron kettle while Tom hung another log over the fire. Steam slowly filled the room. The warmth returned little by little. Doc Harris arrived nearly an hour later after Caleb's ranch hand rode through the rain to fetch him. The old physician removed his gloves before kneeling beside the injured woman. He examined her ankle first, then her knee. Finally, the deep bruises running along her calf where the fallen pine had trapped her. After several quiet minutes, he leaned back with a relieved sigh. No broken bones. Caleb looked up. Are you certain? I'm certain. The muscles are badly crushed. The ligaments have taken a beating, but given enough rest, she'll walk again. Caleb released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Doc Harris began cleaning several cuts across her arms. She'll need at least a few weeks before putting much weight on that leg. He paused, and judging by her condition, she hasn't eaten properly for quite some time. The following morning, pale sunlight slipped through the cabin windows. The storm had finally passed. The woman woke slowly. For a moment, she stared at the unfamiliar wooden ceiling. Then the smell of fresh bread reached her. She turned her head. Caleb stood at the kitchen table, slicing warm biscuits. When he noticed she was awake, he poured a cup of broth instead of asking questions. I figured solid food might be difficult. She hesitated. You trust me enough to feed me? I trust that you're hungry. He placed the bowl beside her. You don't have to eat if you don't want to. She studied him carefully. Most strangers demanded explanations first. Names, reasons, proof. Caleb asked for none of those things. After several long seconds, she picked up the spoon. Later that afternoon, Doc Harris returned to change the bandages. While wrapping the injured ankle, he smiled. The swelling's already coming down. The young woman looked toward Caleb. You carried me. He nodded. You were in no condition to walk. You could have left me there. I could have. Silence settled over the room. Finally, she spoke again. My name is Tala. Caleb smiled politely. I'm Caleb Walker. She repeated his name quietly, as though trying to remember it. Caleb. It sounded unfamiliar on her tongue, yet somehow comforting. Days passed peacefully. Caleb never asked where Tala had come from. He never questioned why she had been alone in the forest. He simply went about his work. Each morning, he left fresh water beside her chair. Each evening, another bowl of hot stew appeared on the table. Sometimes they ate together. Sometimes they hardly spoke at all. Oddly enough, the silence never felt uncomfortable. It felt earned. By the end of the second week, Tala could stand with the help of a walking stick Doc Harris had carved for her. She disliked depending on anyone. The first morning Caleb found her sweeping the porch, he frowned. "I thought Doc Harris said you needed rest." She leaned on the broom with a faint smile. "My hands still work." The porch wasn't going anywhere. It looked lonely. Caleb couldn't help smiling. "I've never heard anyone worry about a lonely porch." She shrugged. "In my village, work was how we thanked people." He gently took the broom from her hands. "You don't owe me work. I owe you my life." "No." He rested the broom against the wall. "You owe yourself time to heal." For a moment, Tala didn't answer, as though no one had ever suggested her well-being mattered. As autumn settled deeper across the valley, a quiet routine began to grow between them. When Caleb repaired broken fences, Tala sat nearby mending old saddle blankets. When he brushed the horses each evening, she gathered wild herbs along the creek once her leg grew stronger. She showed him which mountain plants eased aching joints, which roots reduced fever, which leaves stopped bleeding. One afternoon, she noticed Ranger favoring his front hoof. Without saying a word, she knelt carefully beside the old gelding. She mixed crushed yarrow with warm pine resin before gently wrapping the hoof. 3 days later, the horse walked without limping. Caleb looked genuinely impressed. "You learned that from your family?" She nodded. "My grandmother healed people. I watched more than I helped." "You watched well." A quiet smile crossed her face. It was the first time Caleb had seen her smile without sadness hiding behind it. Yet some wounds could not be seen. Almost every night, Tala woke suddenly. Sometimes from dreams. Sometimes from sounds only she seemed to hear. One stormy evening, the cabin door rattled as wind swept across the valley. The simple noise sent her scrambling backward until her shoulders pressed against the wall. Her breathing became quick and uneven. Caleb immediately noticed. He didn't ask what frightened her. He simply crossed the room and quietly secured the wooden latch. Then he placed another log on the fire. "The wind isn't coming inside." His calm voice slowly steadied her breathing. After several minutes, she whispered, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I should not be afraid of a door." Caleb looked into the flames. "Fear doesn't ask permission. It just arrives." She lowered her eyes. "Where I came from, doors usually opened before someone was taken away." Caleb understood enough not to press further. Whatever had happened, she wasn't ready to tell it, and he wasn't going to force her. Several mornings later, Caleb walked toward the barn. Before sunrise, the horses were unusually restless. Ranger stood near the fence with his ears pinned forward. Caleb knelt beside the soft ground outside the corral. Fresh boot prints. 3 different men. Not ranch hands. Not neighbors. Someone had circled the barn during the night. Without entering. Without stealing anything. They had only watched. He followed the tracks for several yards before they disappeared into the trees. When he returned to the cabin, Tala was standing silently on the porch. She had already seen the footprints. Her face had gone pale. She didn't look surprised, only afraid. Very quietly, she said, "They found my trail." Caleb looked toward the dark forest beyond the pasture. "Who?" Tala's voice barely rose above a whisper. "The men, who were never supposed to let me escape." Caleb didn't ask another question. Not immediately. He looked once more at the boot prints circling the barn. 3 men. Heavy riding boots. Fresh horseshoe marks beside them. Whoever had come during the night hadn't wandered onto the property by accident. They had been searching for someone. He slowly stood. "Come inside." Tala followed without speaking. Once the cabin door was closed, Caleb added another log to the fire before placing 2 cups of coffee on the table. He sat across from her. Not to question, to listen. "When you're ready, tell me only what you want me to know." For several moments, Tala stared into the steam rising from her cup. Then, quietly, she began. "I wasn't born in the forest. My family belonged to a small Apache camp north of the Bitterroot Trails. I barely remember it." She paused. "I was 11 when they found us." Caleb remained silent. There weren't many of them. Only a handful. They attacked before sunrise. They weren't soldiers. They weren't settlers. They hunted people. Her fingers tightened around the warm cup. They sold children. They sold women. They sold anyone who could disappear without questions. The room became still. I escaped once. They caught me. I escaped again. They found me. She looked toward the window. This time, I kept running. I never stopped. Until the forest stopped me. Caleb finally understood. She hadn't been hiding from the wilderness. She had been hiding from men. Men who treated human lives like livestock. He leaned back quietly. Do they know your name? She shook her head. They never cared enough to learn it. Then why keep searching? For the first time, real fear appeared in her eyes. Because I know where they buried their records. Caleb frowned. What records? The names. The children. The women. The ranches. The buyers. She swallowed hard. I saw everything. They believed I couldn't read. They were wrong. Silence settled between them. The truth explained everything. She wasn't simply a runaway. She was a witness. Late that afternoon, 3 riders appeared at the front gate. Deputy Owen Briggs happened to be riding past the ranch and noticed them at the same time. He turned his horse toward the cabin. You expecting company? Caleb shook his head. Not these men. The strangers dismounted before the porch. All 3 wore trail dust and expensive revolvers. The tallest removed his hat politely. Afternoon. We're looking for an Apache woman. Deputy Briggs folded his arms. What business do you have with her? She's a fugitive. He produced a folded paper. Escaped labor contract. We've been hired to bring her back. Caleb accepted the document. At first glance, everything looked official. Signatures. A county seal. Witnesses. Yet something felt wrong. He handed it to Briggs. The deputy studied it carefully, then frowned. This seal isn't from Montana territory. The stranger answered quickly. We came from Idaho. Briggs shook his head. Interesting. Because this county didn't even exist on the date printed here. For the first time, the men's confidence slipped. The deputy looked directly at the tallest rider. Mind explaining that? The man forced a smile. Must be a clerk's mistake. Funny. Briggs folded the paper. I've arrested enough forgers to recognize one. The second rider stepped forward. We don't want trouble. We only want the woman. Caleb calmly answered. Then you've come to the wrong ranch. The man's eyes narrowed. You're willing to protect someone you barely know. Caleb didn't hesitate. I'm protecting someone who's already been hunted long enough. The 3 men exchanged brief glances. Without another word, they mounted their horses. Before leaving, the tallest rider looked back. This isn't over. Caleb watched them disappear beyond the cottonwoods. No, he said quietly. I don't suppose it is. That evening, Deputy Briggs remained for supper. After examining the fake document again, he looked toward Caleb. Those men aren't bounty hunters. I figured. They're organized. They've been using false papers in several territories. He leaned closer. If Tala's telling the truth, she may be the only living witness who can identify them. Tala quietly reached into the pocket of her buckskin dress. She removed a small cloth bundle. Inside rested a brass button engraved with an unusual symbol, a coiled snake surrounding a wagon wheel. I took this the night I escaped. Briggs immediately recognized it. I've seen this mark before. Where? 3 months ago. He looked toward the fading light outside. A federal marshal came through town asking about it. He believed it belonged to a trafficking network operating across the frontier. The deputy carefully wrapped the button again. This could help end all of it. The following morning, before sunrise, an unfamiliar rider arrived carrying no weapon except a walking staff. He introduced himself simply as Samuel Reed, an elderly trader known throughout the Montana territory. I've spent 30 years traveling between ranches and Apache camps. He removed something wrapped in soft deerskin, an old Apache necklace. At its center hung a carved piece of turquoise shaped like a soaring hawk. The moment Tala saw it, she stopped breathing. Her hands began to tremble. I know that necklace. Samuel nodded gently. I hoped you would. He looked into her eyes. A family has been searching for the girl who wore its matching piece. Tala touched the carving with shaking fingers. I thought everyone was gone. Samuel smiled kindly. Sometimes, hope simply takes the longer trail. Outside the cabin, Caleb looked toward the distant pine forest. He realized the danger hadn't ended. It had only revealed something far greater. Somewhere beyond those mountains, Someone had spent years refusing to give up the search for Tala. And before long, that search would finally reach the ranch. The old Apache necklace remained on the table long after sunrise. Neither Caleb nor Tala spoke. Samuel Reed quietly rolled the leather cord between his fingers. "I've carried this for almost 16 years, he said. It belonged to a father who refused to believe his daughter was gone. Tala looked at the turquoise pendant once more. Her fingertips trembled as they brushed its smooth surface. "I remember." She closed her eyes. A river. A circle of cedar trees. A woman singing while she braided my hair. The memories came only in fragments. Not enough to answer every question, but enough to tell her one thing. She had belonged somewhere. 3 mornings later, Samuel led Caleb and Tala toward the western forest. According to old trading maps, White Cedar Basin lay beyond the mountains. It had once been home to several Apache families before raids and harsh winters scattered them across the territory. The ride was quiet. No one hurried. Hope often moved more carefully than fear. Late that afternoon, they reached a narrow valley surrounded by towering pines. Samuel suddenly raised one hand. "We're not alone." Caleb followed his gaze. Fresh horse tracks crossed the stream. Not one rider. Several. Within seconds, figures appeared silently among the trees. Apache scouts. Their bows remained lowered. They watched without speaking. One older warrior slowly stepped forward. His eyes settled on the necklace hanging around Tala's neck. He froze, as though time itself had stopped. He whispered something in Apache. The younger scouts immediately lowered their heads. One of them turned his horse and disappeared into the forest at full speed. Samuel smiled quietly. "They've gone to bring the elders." Less than an hour later, more riders emerged from the trees. This time, they were not warriors. They were families. Mothers. Children. Grandparents. Walking slowly at the front was an elderly Apache man with silver braided into his long hair. Beside him walked an older woman whose face carried the gentle lines of someone who had spent many years waiting. Neither of them rushed. Neither dared. Hope can be frightening after so many disappointments. The elderly woman stopped only a few feet from Tala. Tears already filled her eyes. Very carefully, she reached into a small leather pouch. Inside rested another turquoise pendant. The missing half. When she placed it beside Tala's necklace, the carvings fit together perfectly, like two pieces separated for years. The older woman could no longer hold back her tears. "My daughter." Her voice broke. "We made these when you were born." Tala stared at the pendant, then at the woman's face. Suddenly, everything returned. The cedar lodge, her father lifting her onto his shoulders, her mother's laugh echoing through the trees. The morning strangers attacked. The long years that followed. She collapsed into the older woman's arms. "I'm sorry. I couldn't find my way home." The woman held her tighter. "You were never lost to us. Only hidden." Behind them, the older Apache man quietly covered his face. For 16 years, he had searched every trading post Samuel visited, every hunting trail, every mountain pass. He had refused to let anyone say the word dead. Now, he no longer had to. The reunion was interrupted by the distant sound of galloping horses. Samuel turned immediately. His expression changed. "They found us." Caleb looked toward the eastern ridge. 3 familiar riders burst from the trees. The same men who had appeared at the ranch. Only this time, they weren't alone. Several more followed behind them. The leader pointed directly at Tala. "There she is." Deputy Owen Briggs had anticipated exactly this. Hours earlier, after Samuel left the ranch, Caleb had quietly asked him to notify the territorial marshal if the strangers appeared again. Now, before the traffickers could enter the valley, another group of riders emerged from the opposite ridge. Territorial Marshal Isaac Warren. For deputies, 2 forest rangers. They surrounded the outlaws before a single weapon could be raised. "Drop your guns." One of the traffickers tried to flee through the trees. An Apache scout calmly rode ahead and blocked the only narrow pass. Another reached for his revolver. Deputy Briggs already had him covered. Within moments, the men realized there was nowhere left to run. Iron handcuffs replaced false confidence. Marshal Warren opened the saddlebags carried by the leader. Inside were forged labor contracts, lists of names, receipts, letters, everything Tala had described. The marshal looked toward her. "You weren't only telling the truth. You were the witness we've been searching for." Samuel quietly handed over the brass button Tala had kept since escaping years earlier. It matched the emblem stamped across the seized records perfectly. The case was complete. No dramatic gunfight. No unnecessary bloodshed. Only evidence, witnesses, and the truth. As the deputies led the prisoners away, silence returned to White Cedar Basin. The forest felt different now, lighter, as though it had finally released a burden it had carried for years. That evening, a fire burned in the center of the Apache camp. Families gathered around it. Children laughed. Songs long forgotten filled the valley again. An elder stepped toward Tala. He smiled warmly before asking the question everyone already knew she had been asking herself. Your family has found you. He looked toward the people surrounding the fire, then toward Caleb, who stood quietly beside Ranger at the edge of the camp. Tell me, child, where is your home now? Tala looked at her parents, then at Caleb. Finally, she smiled through tears. The answer would change more than one life. The campfire burned long after the stars filled the Montana sky. Children chased one another between the cedar trees. Old women prepared bread over flat stones. The men sat quietly, speaking in low voices after years of believing this night would never come. For the first time in 16 years, the White Cedar people were whole again. Yet Tala remained sitting near the edge of the fire. The warmth reached her hands, but her thoughts were somewhere else. She looked across the camp toward Caleb. He stood beside Ranger, brushing the old horse without drawing attention to himself. Exactly as he always did, never asking for recognition, never expecting gratitude, simply making sure everyone else was all right. Her father, Gray Wolf, slowly walked over and sat beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled. When you were little, you used to disappear into the woods. Tala laughed softly through her tears. I always came back. You did. He looked toward Caleb. And someone made sure you could come back this time, too. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder. I thought I'd forgotten what home felt like. Gray Wolf gently shook his head. No, you only forgot where to find it. The following morning, Marshal Isaac Warren gathered everyone near the center of camp. The traffickers stood in chains beside their horses. Several crates filled with forged contracts and stolen records lay stacked nearby. The marshal held up one of the ledgers. For years, families disappeared across 3 territories. We never understood how. He looked toward Tala. Until one young woman refused to stop running. He turned toward Caleb. And one rancher refused to stop helping. Deputy Owen Briggs stepped forward carrying another document. The governor has authorized every family listed in these records to be notified. Samuel Reed smiled quietly. Many people believed those names were lost forever. The marshal carefully closed the ledger. Their names again, not numbers. For several moments, no one spoke. Sometimes justice sounded less like celebration and more like relief. 2 weeks later, Caleb and Ranger started the ride home. Tala rode beside him until they reached the old fork in the trail. One path led toward White Cedar Valley. The other returned to Walker Ranch. They stopped beneath the same towering pine where years earlier she had carved childish marks into the bark. I should stay, she said quietly. Your family needs you. They do. She looked toward the valley. They've waited 16 years. Caleb nodded. They deserve time with you. She smiled faintly. And you? I've got horses that still think fences repair themselves. She laughed. The sound echoed through the trees. It felt lighter than any laugh she had ever known. Then the silence returned. Not uncomfortable, simply honest. I don't know how to thank you. Caleb looked toward the mountains. You already did. I never gave you anything. You trusted me. That's enough. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the forest where Caleb had first found her beneath the fallen pine. Life settled into its familiar rhythm once again. He repaired fences, fed horses before sunrise, shared coffee with Doc Harris every Saturday. Some evenings, he still caught himself looking toward the forest without realizing it. Not because he expected anyone, because some habits quietly become hope. Then, one crisp afternoon in early spring, Ranger lifted his head. The old horse gave the same gentle snort Caleb remembered from that rainy autumn morning. Hoofbeats. Approaching the ranch, Caleb stepped onto the porch. A rider emerged between the pines. Then another. Then several more. At the front rode Tala. She wasn't alone. Her parents followed behind her. So did several White Cedar families. Children waved as they approached the ranch. 2 wagons carried cedar saplings. Another carried lumber. One more was filled with blankets, seeds, and tools. Caleb blinked in surprise. What is all this? Gray Wolf climbed down from his horse with an easy smile. Our people talked all winter. We decided something. He looked across the weathered ranch. You gave our daughter a place to begin again. We'd like to help this place become a refuge for others. The weeks that followed transformed Walker Ranch. The Apache families helped rebuild an old guest cabin that had stood empty for years. Settlers from nearby ranches arrived with timber. Tom Granger donated fresh-cut pine boards. Mrs. Dalton brought fruit trees. Doc Harris turned one room into a small clinic for injured travelers. No one asked who belonged to which people anymore. They simply worked together. Above the entrance to the new cabin, Tala carved a simple wooden sign. If you are lost, you are welcome here. One afternoon, a young orphan traveling with a wagon train stopped outside the ranch. He stared nervously at the sign. Caleb walked over. You looking for someone? The boy shook his head. I don't have anyone. Before Caleb could answer, Tala knelt beside the child. She smiled gently. I used to think the same thing. She opened the cabin door. Come inside. The little boy hesitated. Can I stay just for tonight? Tala looked toward Caleb. He smiled exactly as he had the day he carried her out of the forest. You can stay as long as you need. The boy stepped inside. Years earlier, those same words had saved another frightened soul. Now they were being passed on. Every autumn after that, people crossing the Montana forest spoke about a ranch hidden among the pines. Some said it belonged to a quiet rancher. Others said an Apache healer lived there. Most agreed on one thing. If someone became lost, that was the place they hoped to find. Near the front gate stood a weathered cedar post. Hanging from it was the turquoise necklace that had once led Tala back to her family. Visitors often asked why it remained there instead of being kept somewhere safe. Tala always answered with a smile. Because it isn't here to remember where I came from. It's here to remind people that someone can always find their way home. Caleb never thought of himself as a hero. He simply remembered one rainy afternoon when he heard a faint tapping beneath the pines and decided to follow it. That single choice rescued one woman, but its kindness reached a family, a community, and countless strangers who would one day find shelter beneath the same roof. Sometimes the greatest rescue isn't pulling someone out of danger. It's giving them a place where they never have to be lost again.